One Piece. The only show that somehow is longer than all MCU films combined, and yet has a much more coherent and narrative story as of late. Is comparing films and anime fair? I don't know. Scriptwriting me couldn't think of a better comparison. But I digress. As the first stint in my journey into a new genre of YouTube content, I decided to start with the making of a video where I discussed two of my favorite series. And surprisingly, I am not starting with anything My Hero based. So what happens when you combine the best-selling manga and almost the best-selling comic book of all time? Yeah, I am not even joking. I think in the last few years it managed to somehow beat out Batman and Spider-Man for the second place spot. I think Superman is ahead of it, only by 20-something million. What's impressive about that is that a long-standing run of comics since the mid-1900s is being chased up by a manga not even 30 years old. To me, that's crazy. But what happens when we combine that manga elite with the largest media corporation of all time? What would One Piece characters use as their teams? Who would their aces be? What Megas, G-Max, or even Terrestrial Pokemon would they likely use? Well, my mission is to do that in this video. The first installment of my giving anime groups and anime shows Pokemon teams. But additionally, this One Piece one is very likely to get more installments since, well, I can't exactly cram every important One Piece character into a single video. Hell, this video I struggled to give all of Luffy's friends and his grander ally base a spot in this list. I had to cut quite a few people who I wanted to give teams from Luffy's ever-expanding circle of trust. People like Shirahoshi, Rebecca, Dory, Brogy, Kinemon, Momonosuke, Vegapunk, Kami, Shanks, and a whole host of others. As for villains, I will have to make a whole separate list for that one, because good God, One Piece knows how to produce some good antagonists, and there are so many I could cover. Although I did choose one to cover for this video, but more on that later. But for a video like this, I surely have to have some restrictions on their teams, right? And I do. No legends, paradox, ultra beasts, or mythicals, with one very serious exception. But I also am granting this video, unlike future installments in this series, a lot of extra perks. For one, every member of this list will have exactly one Mega, one G-Max, and a Terra-type Pokemon that I felt gave their team an interesting member. Now the big question, will these highly complex and multifaceted characters be relegated to one type? No. I couldn't do that in good conscience and give them a team that really makes sense. However, quite a few teams do tend to lean towards certain types, but for the most part, it won't play a huge factor in the deciding process. Now without further ado, let's move to our first Straw Hat, the one to start it all and the future.
King of the Pirates!
For the captain of the crew, there is a lot to say about him. He's loyal to a fault, crazy inventive, strong in both will and power, a bit rash and tends to let his fist do the talking, much alike his inspiration, Sun Wukong, of which he shares this inspiration with his first Pokemon and his ace Pokemon, Infernape. Since Infernape and our favorite Rubber Rascal both swing from the same tree, it feels only fitting that this Pokemon would be Luffy's ace, not to mention the moniker Monkey D. Luffy as well as the fiery punches, like with Luffy's Red Rock, and more attacks that just suit Luffy's personality and move kit so well. So yeah, Infernape is his ace. I should probably elaborate. The ace Pokemon is not necessarily going to be the Mega or the G-Max or Terra Pokemon. It's going to be the Pokemon that I feel fits them best. They can be the ace Pokemon, but it won't be written in stone. Next up, when deciding on Luffy's team, I looked to Pokemon that best fit his forms. Now, Luffy has a bunch of iconic moves and forms to choose from, but I decided to go with his most classic forms. A Pokemon that would suit his most recent Gear 5, one that would suit his Snake Man form, and one that would suit his Bound Man form. To start with, let's go to the first form he showed of the three, Bound Man. This form is notable for its rather large and bouncy body. But while I could have gone for simply round or large and imposing Pokemon like Snorlax, Hariyama, or Wailord, I decided to go for a Pokemon that fit Luffy in more than one respect. As a nod to this form, but also referenced Luffy's stretching ability and his appetite that could probably bring a famine to the US if he were real. Licky Licky. This bulbous Pokemon fits Luffy's themes and looks in so many scenes, from the comedic ones where he's just finished eating some large and insane meal, to his Boundman form and even his Tankman form. Licky was a Pokemon that I felt was too perfect of a match to not put on this list. Next up, we have one of my personal favorite forms in all of One Piece, and maybe even anime if this didn't exist. In all seriousness, my love for this form comes from how different it acts alongside other shonen form changes that continue to this day to use rage or pain. A form that doesn't take itself too seriously, yet somehow winds up being just as menacing at times. So I wanted a Pokemon that has this kind of goofiness at first glance, but can tap into that inner menace at will. And I found the perfect Pokemon, not just for that reason alone, but because of how its dex entries perfectly align with Luffy in every way. Altaria. Altaria dances and wheels through the sky among billowing cotton-like clouds. By singing melodies in its crystal-clear voice, this Pokemon makes its listeners experience dreamy wonderment. If it bonds with a person, it will gently envelop the friend with its soft wings and then hum. This Pokemon has a kind disposition, but if it's provoked, it will threaten opponents with shrill cries before attacking them without mercy. Nothing could fit him more in my opinion, so Altaria has the next spot. Now for the last of the Pokemon that have a form-based reason. Sort of. I have Snake Man, which comes from one of my top 5 fights in all of anime, Luffy versus Katakuri. But while I could have gone with the look or the form of something like Ambipom, or I could have even gone basic with the snake name and gone Serviper or Arbok, I decided to add a couple of extra layers and even use the first Terra type, the most serpentine one of all, the Dragon type. Additionally, I decided to wrap up 2 other important players from One Piece into this design, starting with his father, also being the reason for the Terra type he received, Monkey D. Dragon. But additionally, the woman who adores Luffy more than anyone, since her whole motif sort of revolves around snakes, serpents, and Medusa, I thought Hancock was a decent inspiration for this Pokemon as well. Then it came to me, what's a seductress serpentine Pokemon that would also benefit from the Dragon Terra type nullifying a water weakness? Salazzle gets the number 4 spot. Now, for his Dynamax, honestly, a lot could fit him, given the whole Dynamax mechanic exaggerates and stretches features, but I felt the best fit for him was a Pokemon whose move and design aesthetic fit the best. G-Max Machamp. For Luffy's final Pokemon, and the mega evolution of his team, I'll be honest, I kinda struggled to decide, but between everything else I kind of already explained with the other sections, as well as the design elements, I settled upon Mega Metacham. Its bandages sort of double up as a look between the multiple arms from Gum Gum Gatling, as well as the smoke around Gear 5's sort of neck area. Design-wise, it fits well, but in its dex entries, it talks about honing a 6th sense of sorts, something I feel is akin to observation hockey. So there you have it. Mega Metacham is Luffy's final team member. But the captain of the ship would be stretched thin without his faithful vice-captain. And what cooler of a vice-captain could you honestly have than Zoro? To start, I feel like there's no better way to begin this than to start with 3 very sword-based Pokemon. After all, 3 swords are better than 1 in Zoro's hands. But let's take it a step further and have each Pokemon be decided by moves that sound like pretty accurate sword moves. With that, we can kind of clunk out 3 Pokemon off rip. With moves like Air Slash, Sacred Sword, and Bitter Blade, I can't think of a better trifecta for Zoro's 3-sword Pokemon than Scyther, Aegislash, and Ceruledge. For Zoro's Terra Pokemon, we also have another Pokemon with a sword-based move that also fits Zoro's color scheme pretty damn well, and benefits from Zoro's Steel Terra type by shedding its bug, poison, flying, and ice weaknesses, and turning them into resistances. This Pokemon being Sceptile. Next, for Zoro's Gigantamax, I will be 100% honest. I was not sure who to go with. I did think about every single Gigantamax Pokemon and whether it could fit Zoro in any sort of niche way. None of them are necessarily a perfect fit, but at least one of them has Steel Wing and Air Slash as its sort of sword-based moves to keep up with the theme we've been going with so far. So that Pokemon will be G-Max Corviknight. Plus, Corviknight having a sort of edgy Raven aesthetic feels like a Pokemon Zoro would have. Now lastly, for Zoro's ace Pokemon, we also have his Mega Evolution. And yes, his ace is a Mega because there is a Pokemon who fits him so unbelievably well even before the Mega Evolution transpires. Between it having Leaf Blade, Sacred Sword, Night Slash, Aqua Cutter, and Psycho Cut, the same Pokemon also has an ability boosting these moves called Sharpness, and even shares a similar green hair to our favorite swordsman. That Pokemon being none other than Mega Gallade. And that rounds up Zoro's team. Leading into the next one. The only person who could reliably get the crew from point A to point B. The infamous cat burglar, Nami. The first thing to know about Nami is she loves money. So two of her Pokemon off rip are very money-based. We have the obvious, the literal money man Pokemon, Goldengo. But additionally, her G-Max Pokemon is a Pokemon known for showering the user in money, and in playthroughs lets the user earn more money from fights from using its G-Max Gold Rush. And ironically still fits her cat burglar moniker. G-Max Meowth. For the next two Pokemon, I really wanted to lean this team into her weather summoning and manipulating abilities, including Wind, Rain, and Lightning. And two Pokemon who I think fit those abilities are the Rain summoning bird Pelipper and the Wind riding Kilowattrel. For her ace Pokemon, I felt that the Pokemon that best fit her would also wield a similar weapon to her, but furthermore, I decided to give them the Terra Electric type to fit Nami's weather summoning aesthetic. Additionally, I wanted to reference Nami's beta design where she had a mechanical arm and wielded an axe. Add in the sort of tomboyish aesthetic, and I think the perfect Pokemon for her ace would be Tinkaton. For Nami's Mega, however, I had a lot to choose from, unlike some of the previous contenders. There was no shortage of options, but all of them just didn't really fit what I figured she would have. But then I remembered a Pokemon that has a variety of connections to the sea, the sky, and electricity. A Pokemon that only just recently got given a Mega Evolution, but one that fits her all the same. Mega Dragonite. And with that team, our navigator would be a force to be reckoned with. But, now we move on to my least favorite member of the whole crew. Possibly even the whole show. Here's the thing. Luffy is a much better man than I am. Because after the shit Usopp pulled in Ennie's lobby, I wouldn't let that man back on the crew for nothing. Believe me, I get it. I cried at the mayor just like every other person with a soul. But for fuck's sake, I hated Usopp for straight up fighting his captain and friend over a ship that he admitted he already knew was going under. When people bring up all the bullshit of people who betrayed the crew, they bring up things like Nami, who had no choice but to betray Luffy and the crew to save her family. Robin, who left the crew and technically betrayed the crew just to save Luffy and the others. Sanji, again, left the crew and fought Luffy to try and deter him from coming back for him to save Luffy and the crew from Big Mom and Germa. But Usopp? He doesn't have that kind of excuse. His insecurity and sadness at losing the Merry was what drove his betrayal, and I hate him for that. Even in more recent arcs, Usopp constantly acts like a snake, like when Nami chose not to disrespect the name of her captain to Ulti. Meanwhile, Usopp's telling her, just say what Ulti wants to hear. He doesn't have the same respect or loyalty as the rest of the crew does for Luffy. Now, I know this sounds like a roast of Usopp, and it is. I fucking hate the man. But regardless of my detestment of him, I do have to make a team for him, so let's begin. Let's start with his Terra Pokemon, and the Pokemon who will reference the source of my frustration with this character, the Merry. I decided to kind of lighten it up for me by using one of my favorite Pokemon in conjunction to the Terra Water type, Dubwool. Since it would reference the fact that Dubwool is a sheep like the Merry was and it's a boat, so hence the Water Terra type. As for his next two team members, I decided to kind of go with his epithet of long nose to add Shiftry onto his team. And for his Gigantamax, I went for the other alias that he has of Sniper King. And it didn't take too long to settle on the literal sniper Pokemon with the sniper ability, G-Max Inteleon. The next Pokemon I wanted to utilize was a reference to one of his allies from during the time skip, Heracles, and I'm sure you can possibly guess who is taking that spot, Heracross. Lastly, I wanted his final two Pokemon to reference his plant-based post-time skip attacks. First one was inspired by the seed vines that he used against Douglas Bullet in One Piece Stampede, and to me there's no better Pokemon for vines than Tangrowth. The second plant Pokemon, however, is a more recent addition to the Mega roster. Mega Victreebel, most closely referencing his Pop Green attacks. I know it seemed like I sped through this section, and I did, because I do not want to linger on this prick. So let's not, and move on to arguably the most important member of the crew, the man tasked with feeding the insane appetite of our rebellious Rubberman, Vinsmoke Sanji. Now for his starting Pokemon, my headcanon is that he has a Pokemon to guard food from Luffy, and the best way I could think of him doing that is having something that possesses and becomes the fridge. And anyone who's seen the complaints about, later generation Pokemon are so uninspired, you know where I'm going with this. Rotom Frost is going to be Sanji's personal safeguard from Luffy's late-night munchies. For the rest of his team, I kind of decided to go with food-based Pokemon that could be stuff Sanji would want to take care of. Every chef, anime or not, needs to have the basics of things like salt and pepper. So who would be a better Pokemon to salt dishes at Sanji's command than the Salt Titan himself, Garganacl? To kind of fit the Japanese theme, I decided to also add a classic Japanese dish to Sanji's repertoire and Pokemon roster. Sushi. And with it comes the sushi Pokemon, Tatsugiri. Adding 2 new food-based Pokemon to his squad, and we aren't even done with the Foodamon inspiration, because now we have to follow Sanji's love of seafood. Even more specifically, his 2 crustacean mons. I decided to use boiled crabs and spicy prawns as his inspirations, and he used them for the Terra and Gigantamax forms. Let's start with our Terramon. I wanted to choose a Pokemon that could represent the Germa weapons as well as the aforementioned shrimp and prawns. Thus his Terramon is a Terrafire Clawitzer. For his Gigantamax, however, I wanted to reference the delicacy of crab legs. And what better Pokemon to represent that than the crab that has the longest legs of all, with Gigantamax Kingler. Now to round out the Pokemon with Sanji's ace Pokemon, and his Mega at that. There's a lot to unpack with this one, from Sanji's incredible speed to his classic move Diable Jambe, to a slightly less classy food dish in fried chicken. I felt the ace for Sanji perfectly suited to him was Mega Blaziken. All in all, Sanji might have one of the funniest teams on this list. Next up, we have the cutest member of the Straw Hats and the doctor of the ship, Tony Chopper. To start with this team, I wanted to begin with a Pokemon that was based on the animals that he is, and the one that he gets confused with. To start, we have the animal everyone thinks he is, the Tanuki or raccoon dog Pokemon Linoone. But then we have what he actually is, a reindeer. And for the reindeer, I could have gone for Sawsbuck. But I figured a second Pokemon that fits a bit better in my opinion is Weirdeer. I know Weirdeer is not exactly the cute or majestic imagery anyone would have picked for Chopper, but I think he would use it because of its elderly person look, sort of resembling his mentors Dr. Hiraluk and Dr. Kureha. It's kind of hard to talk about Chopper and not to reference his role as the crew's doctor. And we all know the classic Doctor Pokemon. Blissey was guaranteed a spot on this team the moment he was included in the list. For Chopper's Terra Pokemon, I wanted to go for the Dark type to reference his Monster Point, Guard Point, and Heavy Point a bit here. So I wanted a very absurdly physical and imposing beast. And to me, the best Pokemon that would fit that role would be Ursaluna. However, it wouldn't be the last Pokemon to reference Guard and Monster Point, as I knew the moment I started this project who his Gigantamax would be. Something so cute, but then so large. A Pokemon that is as cute as he is, and is just as fluffy. G-Max Eevee. And finally we get to his last Pokemon. And this is a reference to both Karate Point and his friend Carrot. The perfect Mega Pokemon for Chopper and his ace Pokemon of the team, Mega Lopunny, rounding out his team completely. In hindsight, I didn't exactly realize his whole team was going to be a normal type team, but it's too fitting in my eyes to change anything, so let's move on to the brains of the crew, Nico Robin. Robin is a whole series of plot twists with how you feel about her. At first, she seems like this villainous henchwoman who you know not to trust. Then after the events of Alabasta, you feel bad for how she was treated and she seems much sweeter, but still mysterious. She then shifts to being the sort of nurturing mother role, and then you finally see her backstory and you just have to look in horror as you realize everything she went through. This woman is easily one of my favorite characters in fiction. So when deciding her team, I wanted to lean closer to the femme fatale vibe, while also adding a lot of Pokemon that are subversive in how you see them. So for our first Pokemon, I wanted to have some Pokemon that are aggressive and sinister despite their initial beauty and looks. And 2 dex entries called out to me immediately. If you're too loud around Hatterene, you risk being torn apart by the claws on its tentacle. This Pokemon is also known as the Forest Witch. And then the second one, although Gorbis is the very picture of elegance and beauty while swimming, it is also cruel. When it spots prey, this Pokemon inserts its thin mouth into the prey's body and drains the prey of its body's fluids. Not to mention, Hatterene has a large Gigantamax form similar to Robin's Gigantofleur. For her younger years, I kinda wanted to reference Pokemon that are avoided for one reason or another, when they aren't meant to be malicious but are seen as some sort of harbinger of some kind. The first is a Pokemon who is seen as a bringer of disaster wherever it arrives. And it's also going to be her Terra Ghost Pokemon to reference her assassin/spy work. That Pokemon being Absol. The other is a Pokemon that was so terrifying it scared a man to death. But it, in itself, is just a Pokemon jealous of Pikachu's success and the love it gets. So much so that in the anime, when it saw itself, it broke down in one of the most tragic moments of the entire Gen 7 anime. That's right, Mimikyu is Robin's 4th Pokemon, as well as her Acemon. Next, I wanted to kind of reference Robin's role on the crew as the historian and poneglyph reader. And there was an immediate Pokemon I thought that fit this niche off-rip. A Pokemon with similar ancient writing and drawings on it. Runerigus. Lastly, for Nico Robin's Mega, I wanted to reference her flower fruit mixed in with her feminine look by giving her Mega Gardevoir. Next up, we have Mr. Super himself, Frankie. Please forgive me for that terrible impression. I can already tell you off the bat that just like how Usopp had the Going Merry repped on the team, I wanted to have the sturdier and stronger boat represented on Frankie's team with the rock type to relay its more solid construction. And since the mascot of the Sunny is a lion, what better Pokemon than Pyroar to show it off? But on the talk of ships, I feel it's only fair to show off his G-Max Pokemon. That is literally a living naval vessel. A Pokemon that has the destructive force of an ancient weapon like Pluton. His ace, G-Max Blastoise. The next 3 Pokemon I used were to reference his cyborg aspects of a kind. From his blasters in his palms being repped by Magmortar, to his more internal components, eluded by Klinklang. And last, his armored exoskeleton being represented by his Mega Evolution, Mega Aggron. Last but certainly not least, I figured a nice nod to his brother was in order for his team. And who better to represent Iceberg than, well, an iceberg. Avalugg. In all seriousness though, with how it floats in the water as well as it works as a makeshift ship, I think it still works even beyond the pun. Speaking of puns, I think it's time we move on to our funny skeleton man. Or should I say, punny skeleton man. Now, with Brooke's team, why don't we begin with his ace Pokemon? His Gigantamax, a Pokemon whose music is so stunning and shocking, well, it'll use G-Max Stun Shock. G-Max Toxtricity. Next, we're going from punk rock to a funky rock. We have his Mega Pokemon. A Pokemon that, like Brook, died out many, many years before, only to get brought back to life just like its user. The only fossil Pokemon that can Mega Evolve. Mega Aerodactyl. For Brook's Terra Pokemon, I wanted to go with a Pokemon that represents a character I need Brook to reunite with soon. Laboon. I decided to go with the only non-legendary whale Pokemon, Wailord, with the Terra Normal to boost its hyper voices and rounds even more. Now for Brook's last 3 Pokemon, I decided on Mandibuzz, Dusknoir, and Marowak. Why, you ask? Because I wanted to throw them a bone. God, I hate myself. Nah, but in all seriousness, aside from Marowak, it's just because of the bone correlation. Marowak, however, has the added benefit of being a fellow Pokemon that was lost and abandoned after the death of those close to it. Bet you wish I had just left it at the joke now. And now we have the last official Straw Hat crew member, but not the last character of the video. First Son of the Sea, Jinbei. To keep this section simple and short, I can explain almost all this team under one blanket term. His Terra Fighting Sharpedo, Dondozo, Walrein, G-Max Dreadnought, and Satitan. These were selected because they are mostly aquatic creatures that look like if you combine them would make something akin to Jinbei. His last Pokemon is the only different one in the category. He ain't aquatic. He's a land shark with a force of power behind him unlike many others. Mega Garchomp. Now, while I would love to give him more Pokemon with more in-depth reasons, it's kind of hard to for a character that's exclusive to post-time skip who is absent for like all but half of 2 arcs. We don't have as great of a scope on him as the other members, so this is what I got. I'm sorry. But now we finally branch out of our official Straw Hats and dive straight into 8 of their allies, per se. First, we have Vivi, the Princess of Alabasta, and right now she's probably one of the most vital players in the game, even while not being as physically strong or as cunning as other characters in the series. For her first Pokemon, I wanted to represent her introduction where she was kind of working undercover as a spy inside of Baroque Works to unravel the web of lies and deceptions built by Crocodile. In case you couldn't tell by the use of wordplay here, her first Pokemon is Spidops. However, Spidops isn't her only Pokemon inspired by her time at Baroque Works. The next one is based on her signature hypnotic mystical dance that spreads a pollen that puts Zoro into a trance. This actually leads to 2 of her Pokemon being inspired by this move. Her Terra Fairy Blossom and her Vespiquen. Her next Pokemon is inspired by her dumbass duck Karoo. And while part of me was tempted to give her Psyduck, I am trying to keep these teams fully evolved with a couple of notable exceptions like Zora's Scyther, which is weirdly the exact same stat total as Scizor and Kleavor, while fitting Zora's green aesthetic better. So if not Psyduck, what is the goofy bird going to be represented by? Meet her ace, Cramorant. The Goofy Duck will be the 4th Pokemon of her team, but that isn't the only goofy pet she met along the way. She also met the... To the best of my knowledge, there is only 1 camel Pokemon in the game, and it has a Mega, which allows me to place it as her Mega on this list. Mega Camerupt. Lastly, we have to deal with the problem of her Dynamax, which, I'll be honest, kind of stumped me, because once you eliminate the 2 Urshifus and Melmetal for their legendary/mythical status, Grimmsnarl, Alcremie, Colossal, Charizard, Duraludon, Butterfree, Gengar, and Sandaconda for being better fits with later entries to come, it leaves you with 11 options, of which I feel none are a real good fit. But I managed to kind of narrow it down to 2. G-Max Venusaur and G-Max Lapras. Well, G-Max Venusaur kind of fits in with the pheromones excuse I gave for Blossom and Vespiquen. My headcanon is that she would choose G-Max Lapras Not because it necessarily matches with her in any way besides the blue hair color, but because I think she would try and use it as a way to ward off attackers like Crocodile from ever coming back again, especially knowing Crocodile's sand body is weak to water. So that's why I kind of decided to go with G-Max Lapras. Now we move on to the second heartbreaking case of a potential Straw Hat that just won't come to fruition anytime soon. Yamato. This was a team that I felt perfectly suited her Oni theme very well, as the first 4 Pokemon are all very reminiscent of ancient Asian demons, myths, and Onis. Sneasler, Hisuian Arcanine, Alolan Ninetales, and Terra Ice Hisuian Zoroark fit the Oni theme of Yamato perfectly, while seeming like Pokemon that would thrive in a colder climate that someone like Yamato was forced into. Her next Pokemon also kinda fits the Demon Oni theme as well as the others, but also has a Gigantamax form that leans into it even more so. Gigantamax Grimmsnarl. As for her last Pokemon, I wanted it to resemble her Devil Fruit half-human form, the mythical Dog Fruit. And to be honest, there isn't exactly a perfect fit. I found that a pretty damn close one would be Mega Lucario. Between it being a humanoid dog and fighting injustice like Yamato, I don't see anything inherently wrong with it. Thus wrapping up Yamato's team. Next up we have a more recent fan favorite in Bonnie. Kuma will possibly get a spot of his own in a part 2 if it's requested, but when we were first introduced to Bonnie we were referring to her as the Glutton, which definitely influenced her first 4 Pokemon, although each one has secondary reasons afterwards. But before I go into them, I must warn you now. This part has heavy spoilers for the most recent parts of the anime and manga. Last warning for spoilers. A timestamp will be layered over the video telling you when to skip to. You were warned. First of all, I wanted to allude to her bloodline heritage with her first Pokemon Hydrapple, since she is a much sweeter and much less evil celestial dragon by blood. But that same blood is also what led to my choices for her second 2 Pokemon, her G-Max Alcremie and Vanillux, both of which are representing the sapphire scale disease she had as a child thanks to the cursed blood from the celestial dragons. This is best seen through the crystals making up the lower half of Vanillux and the berries kind of looking like the crystals of the sapphire scale disease on Alcremie. Her last food Pokemon I chose to line up with her ability to distort futures and change into the ever-happy Sun God. Her gloomy, more depressed form and happy Sun God form working in tandem to make Cherrim one of the best parallels I could think of. But before I can address her ace Pokemon, I need to address her Pokemon who she keeps as a reminder. To remember who caused her suffering. Saint Saturn. The epitome of the word evil, with a half-cow, half-spider body, which leads to her Terra Bug Pokemon, the demon cow who probably traumatized a majority of us back in the gold and silver days, Miltank. And now for my favorite part of the video, we can address the one light in Bonnie's life. The one gargantuan hero she had, the man who raised her, the man who cured her, the man who ended his human life for her, and the man who gave her a family and people like Kizaru, Vegapunk, and Sentamaru. Bartholomew Kuma, a man who deserved much better, the best parent anyone could possibly have asked for. It is for this reason I have to give her the ultimate parent Pokemon, Mega Kangaskhan, finishing up Jewelry Bonnie's team. Now we move on to another tragic character, the first of Luffy's 2 brothers. May he rest in peace, Portgas D. Ace. When designing his team, I'll admit I gave him a lot of fire types, but I think I was relatively creative with how this came out. His first Pokemon is a little nod to his introduction when he first met Smoker, who also will probably be included in part 2. Or is it more accurate to say he was smashed into by Smoker? Anyway, I wanted to use a fire type heavily associated with smoke, and I landed on Torkoal. Next, I wanted to kind of have a Pokemon that referenced his hoodlum upbringing and delinquent behavior. And what's a better delinquent Pokemon than Scrafty? Now, both his Gmax and his Terra are based on his father, Whitebeard, through their manipulation of the stone and earth below and their ability to cause earthquakes. I am adding Gmax Colossal and Terra Ground Crustle to his team. And the reason I chose Crustle was because of the amount of carrying Whitebeard was doing in Marineford for his crew, only to have it be wasted by Ace. Just like how Crustle carries half a chunk of molten rock on his back. For his last two team members, I want to add a Pokemon that references his brother Luffy and his all but unconfirmed love in Yamato. To start with, I thought I'd probably address Luffy first, and I considered adding Simisear, but that seemed like a disservice to Luffy. So I ended up using Red Hawk as an inspiration, and ended up using Talonflame. Which means Yamato gets the luxury of inspiring Ace's Mega Pokemon, and to be honest, I went with the Oni trope again, but it also kind of references her dad in a roundabout way, with his Ace Mega Charizard X. With Ace's team done and dusted, the next team we head on to is the second user of the Flame Fruit, and the second brother of Luffy, Sabo. First, I want to start with his Ace Pokemon. The Charizard passed down to Sabo in the wake of his brother's death, but rather than use it in the same way, he decides to maximize the flames and make Charizard hold the strongest firepower of his team in honor of his brother, in the form of G-Max Charizard. The next four members of his team are meant to represent members of the Revolutionary Army, including himself. Kommo-o to serve as Monkey D. Dragon, Hariyama to represent Kuma, his Terra Psychic Komala to stand in for the brains of their crew that keep him in check, also kind of his unconfirmed girlfriend, Koala. And lastly, Alolan Marowak to represent himself, especially with the fiery staff feeling like a perfect nod to his choice of weapon. For his last Pokemon, I wanted his Mega to be a Pokemon that could sort of represent his fallen brother Ace, and also reference how his brothers thought he was dead for the longest time. And I figured what better way to do that than to give him a Hellhound Pokemon, Mega Houndoom. But now we drift over from Luffy's brothers to Luffy's rivals. And we will be starting with the mad lad who tried to pull up on Shanks twice, and well, we know how that went. To start off with his team, I want his first two Pokemon to represent his Magnet Fruit powers. These two were possibly the easiest ones to decide so far. Magnezone and Probopass. More than that, though, his other three Pokemon likely found their way into his employ despite not being magnets themselves, but thanks to their iron hides sticking close to Kid in many ways. Two of which are his new form Pokemon, G-Max Duraludon and Mega Steelix. The last of his metallic-ish Pokemon is actually not a Steel type, but it has Steel Stab, thanks to Steelworker. A Pokemon he will likely need to bail him out of the depths of the ocean he now finds himself in. Dhelmise. His last Pokemon requires a bit of explanation, as it's based on a theory that a few people have, that Kid is one of the Vegapunk satellites gone rogue. This is believed because of this Sea Beast Vegapunk thing having such an uncanny resemblance to Kid, or that all the Vegapunks go by Punk and then a number. Meanwhile, here's Kid with the number 7 lathered over his main attack, which coincidentally is called Damned Punk. So I decided to go for a sea Pokemon with heavy inspiration and military tech from its beta form, and the Pokemon I landed on was Octillery, with the Terra Poison type to reference pollution, ink, and smog. Next, we move to the second Doctor on this list, and Luffy's other rival, Trafalgar Law. Now, Law's team was interesting to build. First thing I wanted to do was build his team with a Doctor and Nurse Pokemon that wasn't Blissey after giving it to Chopper. I actually got both, as I landed on Indeedee and Ordino, to be what represents his abilities as a doctor. Next Pokemon only seemed fitting since it's based on his crewmate Beppo, who just bailed him out of the worst jumping Law has ever seen. So to represent his polar bear companion, I went with Beartic, as it evolves from the adorable Cubchoo into the monstrous beast that is our polar bear Pokemon Beartic. Our next Pokemon, and Law's Terra Grass Pokemon, is based on the fact that the menacing Trafalgar Law, one of the worst generation, the vanquisher of Big Mom, and someone considered on par with Monkey D. Luffy, is a nerd. A nerd who loves ninjas. I wanted to go with a Pokemon that could camouflage, learn Water Shuriken, and even has like ninja inspirations. One that would pair well with the Grass Terra type to become immune to powder moves like a ninja, that also allows it to blend into flowers and grass. So for that Pokemon, I settled on Excelgor. Truly a Pokemon I could see Law hunting down avidly. Now for his last two Pokemon, I wanted to reference his insanely OP Devil Fruit, which is funny because the fruit he possesses is called the Opie no Mi. So the fruit's abilities are characterized by creating a room where the user can do just about anything. The effects being so confusing, so chaotic and befuddling, which is also going to segue into his G-Max Pokemon for its signature move, G-Max Befuddle, that has a multitude of random effects it can spray opponents with. That Pokemon is G-Max Butterfree. However, his Mega Pokemon also refers to his abilities, as it can make things float, levitate, and bend things to its will using psychic powers. Not to mention the bonus of it having a 7,000 IQ to match Law's incredible wit. That's right, Law's Mega and Ace Pokemon, Mega Alakazam. And now we move on to the last of Luffy's allies. A true man amongst men who sacrificed everything for Luffy, and a character who I hope survives and gets to join the Straw Hats soon. Bon Clay. To start his team off, I can fill half of it, including his Mega, with Trickster and Illusion Pokemon like Sableye, Zoroark, and Mega Banette. This is to reference not only his Devil Fruit power, but additionally makes note of his roles in helping Luffy in Impel Down and his work in Baroque Works under Crocodile. Which actually leads me to his next Pokemon and the G-Max of his team. Inspired by his former boss Crocodile, between sand and reptile themes, I feel G-Max Sandaconda fits him best. For his last two Pokemon, I wanted to allude to his ballet and martial arts themes, with a secondary design inspiration being the reason for the next Pokemon. Swanna. And for his last Pokemon, I wanted to show off the karate side a lot more while giving it the Terra Flying type, to grant it the elegance needed for ballet as well. Thus, I landed on Mienshao, giving the absolute GOAT a truly elegant team. Now we go from a redeemed villain to one that will never be forgiven for his atrocities. The only villain on this list, and our last team for the video. A trainer that defies the rules in One Piece, breaks our perception of those rules. No one can handle more than a single Devil Fruit? Don't tell Teach that. He has two, and we don't even know if that's a limit. Most people, myself included, doubt it. If you need any proof how terrifying this man is, look at how people react when dealing with this menace. He has gone toe-to-toe with the heavy hitters of the verse, but to boil him down to power alone is a major insult to this man's cunning. Every decision he makes is cold, calm, calculated, and above all else, he manages to place himself in the right place at the right time, every time. So we need to provide him with a team that's just as challenging and defiant to the rules as he is. Starting with the first rule we had in this video, the no mythical rule, as his first Pokemon is the Darkness Pokemon, a Pokemon that keeps people up at night with nightmares, much like Teach, a known insomniac. His ace Pokemon, Darkrai. The second rule this demon has already broken from the One Piece world, having more than one Devil Fruit power. Many have theories to why this is. Many claim it's due to 3 souls. Many claim he is a clone. There are so many theories as to why, but even more are asking what fruit is next. And there are 2 major theories. Almost all the fandom believes that the next fruit Teach will get will be a Zoan, since he already possesses a Logia and a Paramecia. The two most common Zoans they believe he will get are the Kraken or the Hydra. So I'm giving him a Pokemon based on both, with them both fitting well as they also have the dark typing. First, to represent the Hydra along with Teach's three-headed Jolly Roger, I chose Hydreigon. It too is a destructive force that has three personalities like many believe Teach has. As for the Kraken, I decided to have Teach defy the rules once more and use a Terra type that's not even a Pokemon type, the Stellar Terra type, which when used with Terra Blast and an ability known as Contrary, can be a devastating lethal combo. Combine this with a Kraken inspiration and the dark typing, and you have Malamar, a perfect fit for someone as cruel and evil as Teach. Lastly, I want to use his last three Pokemon to show off abilities he currently possesses, starting with his ability to nullify Devil Fruit powers, or perhaps abilities, adding Weezing to his lineup thanks to its neutralizing gas ability. For his G-Max Pokemon, I wanted to have something akin to his Black Hole ability, swallowing all that is in its way, a horrifying ability that absorbs things into its darkness as you are forced to watch in helplessness and terror, unable to flee. With all of this, I settled upon the Pokemon whose signature move G-Max Terror ties all of this in a nice little bow. G-Max Gengar joins the lineup. And for the last Pokemon of this team and this video, I wanted to show somehow a little bit of incorporation of Whitebeard, the stolen Tremor fruit he took at Marineford. And the Pokemon I felt fit this vibe in the best way while maintaining Teach's maliciousness was Mega Tyranitar, finishing the team for Marshall D. Teach. What do you think of these teams? Who's your favorite? Would you like to see more videos like this? If so, which anime should I do next? Leave a comment down below telling me your thoughts. But until next time, have a good one.